Everybody, welcome to day 3 of the China Market Entry 2022, 2023, to go or not to go to China. Today's topic is all about developing an ecosystem in China. And there's a lot that we're going to cover today, with Manfred then coming in and interrupting as usual with his points as well. But what we're going to look at is something I had spoken to about yesterday, which is the value ladder. It's how do you want to collaborate with people, with third parties in China? Who are the key individuals to start your operation? Where are they going to be located? Is it going to be inside or outside of China? What are the scenarios available for employing people in China? What's the cost of having these people on board? And then what are the challenges and solutions in building this network of people that are on the ground in China and you're not there? So again, a lot of content. We're going to go through this. And again, any questions that you might have, please put them into the chat box. Manfred is going to be checking the chat box and interjecting here or there as well during today's presentation. So the value ladder is something that I created because actually I was struggling personally working with certain third parties in China, getting frustrated by them. And I actually had a friend who pinpointed me to this model, which is called the value ladder. It's something that she's been using in Europe to evaluate not just third parties, but also people that she's looking to hire for her team. And I hadn't really thought of it in this way. And I find it actually very useful because when I am evaluating and benchmarking people that I want to collaborate with and work with, and this is referral partners, this is third parties that are going to offer me a service, all the way through to clients, and then also employees, it's helping me evaluate who do I want to surround myself with, okay? Now, in China, there is this tendency that one of these models is more prominent than the others, okay? But it is going to offer you less value and probably not give you the profitability that you need during your startup phase. So to highlight what these models are, so the first one is the do-it-yourself model, which still a lot of people think that they can do it themselves in China. The next one is the do-it-for-you model, which basically means you delegate, you don't take charge, you let things happen, and you leave it at that. Or the last model, which is the one that I truly believe in, is the do-it-with-you model, meaning that I evaluate referral partners, third parties, customers, employees, everybody that is in my ecosystem with the fact, are they willing to help me grow my business and do it with me? Do they all have the same vision that I have in growing this business? And if somebody doesn't have that mindset or that attitude, I actually put them lower down in the value ladder. And I use this as a determination tactic, okay? Now, what does the do-it-yourself model mean? And I've related a lot of this to the incorporation phase because this is what I deal with and what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis. I have clients who have either hired somebody they've only just met, who actually is a sales guy or business development guy, who has been now instructed to incorporate their company, has no expertise whatsoever in corporate administration, probably has no contacts with the Ministry of Commerce, but he's been said, we've hired you now, we're going to save this cost, not use a lawyer, not use an incorporation agent, please do it yourself. And because this is something so new and because people are trying to prove themselves from day one, they don't ask for help and they don't know where to start. And there are situations where you find out 6 months later that the company was never incorporated and that there is no business license associated with that company. And yes, this still happens today. And the fundamental reason why people are doing this is to save cost. I'm going to relate it to Manfred's business because I also see this on a day-to-day basis. It's doing the recruitment of people yourself, right? It's evaluating people without really knowing what to evaluate. It's picking people out of a hat. It's the candidate saying a salary and you just accepting without realizing what the industry levels are, all in the name of, we don't want to pay for a headhunter or a recruitment agent or somebody who has an appropriate network. We want to save that cost, so we will do it in-house. Okay. This is the do-it-yourself model. And unfortunately, like I said, it still happens today. And the reason why people do it is to save cost. And the downside to this is you are not creating a sound foundation for your business, because obstacles will arise along your China journey, and you take 5 steps forward to only then take 10 steps back, and you have to restart everything again, losing time and losing investment money.
And if I shortly may here, you know, at the end of the day, if you go to somebody like Christina, if you go to somebody else, the setup costs are not, you know, if you look at kind of the first 3 years or the first year in terms of budget, the setup costs are not a big budget block. However, if let's assume, for example, you know, you go through us and hire kind of a business development guy or a sales manager who is strong at doing that, and then you're wasting kind of a lot of his time by letting him kind of do the setup, is the people are not going to be happy with that. But even worse, like you're wasting that person's time. He should be there for you, kind of selling and using his strengths.
Exactly. The next model, and this is what is prominent in China, it is the do it for you model. So this is working again with employees who are, in the end of the day, reactive, not proactive. This is working with third parties who just do the service. They don't take it any step forward. This is the customers who actually are not placing recurring orders. They are only ordering once and you never see them again. Why? Because all you are doing is delegating the work without actually taking care of the business and understanding data. What you want is to work with providers that are going to provide you with that added value, who are going to be proactive with you, who are going to give you the insight that you need. Now, I'm in an industry and profession in terms of the accounting world, where generally accountants are personality-wise very reactive. They're not the most proactive of thinkers. They're not the, you know, they like to sit behind their desk, behind their screens and plug in numbers, and that's their day-to-day job, right? It is hard to find that accountant or that finance manager who's going to bring that added value and not feel shame, you know, who's going to become that enemy, not be shamed or embarrassed to say something's wrong, or there's a red flag, or there's something suspicious going on. The same perspective of a sales manager or BD manager, you want somebody who's going to go that extra mile for you to bring the business to that vision that you're looking for. Okay?
You want the A-team.
You want the A-team, exactly. Which leads me to model 3. And it's the do it with you model. This is the top of the value ladder. There's unparalleled service, unparalleled offers, and there's a value proposition that is there. You want to work with individuals. You want to have people in your ecosystem who have the same goals and aspirations as you. You want to create actually a win-win situation for everybody. I'll reflect it to my own business. If I can help you grow your business, it means that my fees will increase and I'm also happy. My goal is not to block you. My goal is to make sure that you operate to a level where I can grow with you. So we're growing parallel one to each other. The same for Manfred, recruiting individuals that are the top of the top, right? Who are going to help you to grow your business. That will only mean you come back to him to hire then the rest of the team that's going to help you with that operation to bring that added value so that you can grow and succeed. It's working with people that are going to make sure that they are not the ones that are making the decisions for you, but that you are that they are advising you on what decisions have to be made and giving you the pros and cons of each of those decisions so that you have absolute clarity and absolute transparency on how to grow this business. So when you are talking with individuals in China, third parties, like I said, this whole ecosystem of people, have it in the back of your mind. How do you want to work with this individual? And how is he willing to work with you? Okay. And that's the whole basis of today's presentation, is this value ladder. Please keep this in the back of your mind as we're going through the content today. You want people not making decisions for you, although that is the easy way out, but you want to have that advisory on what should be the decisions that you made and how to move them on. I just had a call prior to this, client call prior to this workshop, and I love it. Why? Because actually, not only do I have the GM on the call, but I've also got the financial controller on the call. And the two of them, usually I just stand back, the two of them are talking to each other about the growth and development of the business. And the financial controller is saying, you've got to make a decision on X, Y, Z. These are the pros and cons. It's an absolutely fantastic dynamic to see. I love it. This is what you need. You need these people to have this back and forth conversation and to give you that insight. It all goes back to day one, the data. The people are going to give you that insight and that data. Before I move on, Manfred, do you want to add anything?
Just kind of one short thing, you were saying sometimes it's about cost saving. If you do the foundation and if you do kind of the first building blocks, that goes for essential things like setting up the company, as well as kind of the first employee or the first distribution partner, I strongly suggest, look at the cost benefit ratio and not just at the cost or at the investment, you add you pay 10,000, you get 100,000 is different to you pay 6,000 and you get 20,000. You have that ratio a little bit in mind.
So this is the next two slides are slides that I put almost everywhere when I talk about China and building an ecosystem. I truly believe that knowledge is power in China. The more that I know, the easier it is for me to be able to negotiate, the easier it is for me to have leverage over negotiations and discussions, whether, again, it's with third parties, customers, or employees. You have to build a knowledge base in China. Where are you going to build that knowledge base? Who is going to give you that education on doing business in China, understanding what the regulations are, so that you can make decisions immediately in relation to your business? And not just any decision. It's not just, making a decision from the top of your head. It's making good decisions quickly related to the business. All right. So where are you going to build this knowledge base? And building an empowering business ecosystem is going to be vital for the development and growth of your company in China. Okay. You cannot go to China alone. You cannot do this yourself. It's as simple as that. I wish we could downsize the ecosystem, but my ecosystem is enormous because I have backups of backups of backups to build my network. And I also want to highlight that when you do meet people related to China and you have that first conversation, you might say, well, you know what, right now, I don't need this person. He's useless to me in terms of what I'm trying to build. Nobody is ever useless when it comes to China. Somebody can always bring something to your business at some stage in your journey. So don't just shrug this individual away. Don't throw the name card away. You don't know how they're going to grow, and you don't know how useful they could be as you are growing in the Chinese market. So I do know a lot of people who clear out their WeChats. I've never deleted somebody from my WeChat account, just because I never know when somebody might become useful to me. Okay, so make sure you don't just eliminate people. Now, where are you going to find and meet people that can help to educate you on China, on doing business in China? The first place, very simply, are lawyers, corporate service providers that are going to provide you information on what is the trend and what is happening right now. Subscribe to their newsletters, join the webinars and workshops like this, so that you can gain that education and you can gain current information. Chambers of commerce are also another fantastic way of getting up-to-date information. There is the British Chamber of Commerce in China, the American Chamber of Commerce. I mean, every country has a Chamber of Commerce in China, somewhere in China. Subscribe to them. The next is, and I know a lot of you came through the China-Britain Business Council, is join your home country's China Association. So again, you can network and meet people and get an understanding of what are the trends and what is happening in the Chinese market. All right. Further to that, it is attending trade shows, even if they might be virtual. I know it's not the best methodology, but it is still a way of connecting with people. LinkedIn is still a great source of connecting with people in China as well, not just for employees, but also looking for third parties and just connecting with people to see the information that they are sharing. Join mini programs on WeChat, again, to get up to date. I'm on almost all of the Chamber of Commerce's mini programs, and I get all the up-to-date articles through that. It's also attending virtual, if not real, networking events as well. So this is just a short idea of how you can meet people, how you can connect with people. And this is something that should be done on a daily basis. Okay. Now, when you are starting your operations in China, who are these key individuals? And I think Manfred and I might have a very different opinion on this. So I think it'll be great for Manfred to pipe in and join in as I'm going through. Just because, again, we're two very different leaders and might view things in a different way. All right. When I look at a client's operation in China, where do I see things that are needed? What functions are actually needed? For me, there's strategy. Somebody needs to continuously be looking at the strategy for China and taking the time to be able to pivot at a moment's notice. Marketing and branding are fundamental. Do not think that just because you are a Western brand that everybody knows you. No, you have to build that brand and invest a lot in marketing initiatives so that people become more and more aware of you. Sales or business development, if you like, is critical. You need somebody to go out there and actually sell and get leads and get inquiries. Customer service is of vital importance, I believe more so in China than in the West. Then, of course, it depends on the sector that you are in, but you might need technical engineering. You might need somebody for supply chain and logistics, innovation. And by innovation, I'm looking at product development, tech development. You might, one of my clients is in the food and beverage sector, and they were realizing that through focus groups, actually, through data, that their products were not selling for a certain reason, and they had to do a whole repackaging campaign, i.e. innovation, specific to the Chinese market to be able to attract more consumers. And then last but not least is administration. Okay, so it's finance, HR, legal. I think that's, finance, HR, legal, general office administration, right? These types of things. So for me, these are the 8 core functions. And again, you might not start off with all of these functions immediately from day one, okay? What are the roles that are needed in these positions? For me, they are senior managers. Please don't make the mistake that I did. So when I first arrived in China, we hired junior people initially because of cost saving. So when we were building originally our accounting team as outsourced providers, we went the cheap route and hired junior accountants that were 2-3 years out of graduating school, had only 2 to 3 years of on-the-ground experience. They could offer 0 advisory. They had no experience to be able to offer any form of advisory to our clients. We had to completely restructure the team. We had to bring in heads and managers who could offer that value added service. When you are recruiting, that first person cannot be somebody who is junior. They need to be somebody who has experience, which is why in all of these roles, you are finding head of China or in a managerial role. Okay. I have a very good friend, just a point on the administration side. I have a very good friend of mine who opened his own coffee roasting company in Shanghai. This was 10 odd years ago. And he approached me one day and said, Christina, I need your advice about VAT in China. I said, ask away. So we spoke about it. And then at the end of the conversation, I said, I'm sorry, but Ben, don't you have your own accountant? Like, don't you have your own finance manager? And he said, yeah, but I actually went the cheap route, hired somebody who was 2 to 3 years out of graduation. She actually has no idea how to manage VAT within the company. And so I need that extra advisory. And then I'm going to go back now and teach her. I said, what are you doing? So, you know, it's again, and he's lucky. He has a friend who's giving free advice, which I did, which normally I would have charged for. And he's gotten away with it. But in the end of the day, do you think he has the capabilities of growing his business with somebody who cannot be proactive and even advise him on the decisions that have to be made? He's doing everything retroactively as it happens. No, you need to be ahead of the game. You need to be able to predict, forecast, foresee what is going to happen.
I think if I may shortly add, Christina, I think if you find yourself in that sort of position, out of whatever reason, you know, you kind of may want to, you know, look at the budgets in the years ahead and kind of see, you know, when can you upgrade that role. You know, you don't need to do everything at once, you know, because we know that starting up is there's many decisions and a couple of them will maybe not be as good as the other ones. But at least, you know, look at the next couple of years' budgets, find out early on what then a good finance manager costs, because it just doesn't help. You know, if you get somebody out of graduate school who doesn't know nothing, of course they'll cost nothing.
But they also won't bring value.
No,
right?
it's worse than that, because they not only not bring value, they destroy value, because there's crucial things that they should be taking care of and they won't. And additionally, they'll bring you into trouble, and additionally, they cost a lot of energy. It's the same thing as with that type of employee here in Europe. You know, in that sense, is nothing different. The only thing different is just because it's most likely a very strategic market, so it will be costing you more.
And I want to highlight something. You can't, so in Europe, just to relate it to the Europe equation, in Europe, you would have a team of people that would educate this individual. There would be training on offer. They would know what the internal operational guidelines, because everything is in existence. China, you're starting from scratch. There is no training. And if you then say to me, well, I'll train them. How can you train them? I'm not an expert on Chinese finance and accounting. I am after 20 years. But do you think I was when I first arrived? No, I had to rely on my team to give me information and data about finance and accounting. The same will be about marketing and branding in China. You need somebody who has that expertise, who can guide you on what needs to happen and what needs to occur, right? They are the experts. Pay for that knowledge.
And again, if I may add on this one, I think what is important at that point is, you know, whether you're starting, whether you're 2 roles, whether you're 10 people, you need to look a little bit at organizational development. And that really means is which roles do you have and what do you expect them to do? The traditional way kind of talking about roles is still that document called job description. From my perspective, is insufficient. There's so many things it doesn't cover. You can kind of make it a lot better by only doing one thing, by adding the outputs that this role needs to produce, you know, within a year. Because the next time you hire, you rehire, or you change, you know, that will give you a lot of help in actually hiring that guy. Is he able to close 10 deals a year or not? Is he only closing one deal, or is he closing 30 deals? That's what matters. It does not matter kind of, the theoretical know-how. Sorry, Christina.
No, I also want to add in that it's a really good point, actually analyzing what the outputs of the role should be. Why do I say that? I say that because you're not going to hire these 8 people from day one. You're going to hire one person who's going to start. And ultimately, you need this one person to do all 8 of these jobs. You need someone who's flexible, right? And again, this is not easy to find, but you need somebody who's flexible. So instead of dictating what the job description is, because if you start listing all 8 things and all the subcategories, nobody is going to accept this job with that type of job description. But if you highlight that we need, I don't know, after 12 months, 10 clients, we need a revenue of X, Y, and Z. We need to create this foundation. We need operational guidelines. We need and you're highlighting what needs to be produced after 12 months, which is the KPIs or the targets, or again, it's the outputs. It's gonna probably entice candidates more by what they need to achieve than what is this full job description? And this is everything that has to, it's overwhelming.
And it's 2 things really. It's not just about the candidates, it's also about you. There's this Chinese saying, 愚公移山, old Yu is kind of moving mountains with his wheelbarrow. That takes time. You need to kind of have a bit of an understanding on what is feasible and what isn't feasible. Some clients, they come along and say, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And you look at it and you say like, are you going to be hiring 5 people? And they say, no, one person should be doing that.
And it leads to the discussion we had yesterday, I think, about expectations.
Exactly.
Right? What are your expectations on these first hires?
And so that's the first thing, get your own act together in terms of what needs to be done, what is feasible. And then kind of in the interview process and in finding these people, you can try and match that. You can put things on the table. And just let me be very loud and very clear about this one point. The first guy, in a certain sense, or the first woman, is always special. You will not just pluck somebody out of a kind of 50,000 people large multinational company and then make him the sort of first guy for your entity. That doesn't work. You need to have a guy who has that startup spirit and who can kind of perform in that environment where there's no support departments, nothing there, and you kind of you go in and you're very hands-on every day. You need to look at those details, otherwise you're very unhappy 6 months later on.
Now, just to move on, a lot of these roles you can actually initially outsource to third parties. And again, it's evaluating what is the value that these third parties are going to provide to you. So I've listed here, this is a very short list, right? This is, for me, what is the key highlight? And actually, I'm even missing one based on the call I just had previously, which is maybe you need even an IT expert to set up your IT infrastructure. Didn't even add that inside. So, I mean, you have to think about all aspects of your business, but lawyers, incorporation agents, accounting, tax, and payroll providers, auditors, headhunters, media marketing agencies, certification and product registration agencies. I would also add in that section, IT infrastructure. Then you also have suppliers, distributors, customers. I mean, customers, you're not outsourcing customers, but it's part of your ecosystem that you're building up. Logistics providers, TPs for e-commerce, and the list can go on, okay? Now, initially, you can outsource a lot of these functions to third parties, but it brings me back to the value ladder. Are you outsourcing just to delegate and they do it for you? Or is your intention and work with providers that want to grow it in parallel with you, okay? It's really analyzing the value add that they're going to bring you. It is not a cost equation. It is the value that they are going to be providing to you, which is vital for the success of your company. Manfred, do you want to add anything on the outsourcing side?
Yes, I mean, just try and focus. which really means everything that's non-necessary at the very beginning, go outsource. And I think that is important, because you need to make progress, right? You need to create and keep that momentum. At the beginning, with the kind of the first initial team, it's like a startup. So what really matters is motivation and momentum. And that kind of means that, you know, if you can free them of some activities that decrease that, I would actually suggest doing it, you know.
It's keeping your structure, I guess, as simple as possible, especially during the startup phase.
And
Really analyzing the key roles that you need initially.
And one more thing, I mean, this depends a little bit on whom you pick, but again, I've said it and I'll repeat myself here. You know, I appreciate Christina and the way she approaches her role a lot. So if you kind of, you know, outsource to Christina, for example, the accounting, and you have that monthly call, you can use that monthly call to learn, to question, to even interrogate, you know. That is extremely useful. That sort of learning, I completely agree with Christina, it needs to occur. But obviously a neutral external one is easier for him or for her to tell you the truth, as opposed to your employee, who might not be interested in kind of, you know, telling you everything. So I think that is and kind of can be an added value. It is with Christina. For the other ones, you need to check with them on, you know, how they kind of see their role and what they offer to you.
Where are they located? So, and again, we're talking about startup phase, right? Where should these individuals be located? Should they be inside or outside of China? And again, this is very much my opinion. Manfred might have a very different opinion from what I'm actually stating today. Let me just move this down. So basically, from a strategy perspective, right? Head of China. Now, I have put abroad for one simple reason. This is the pandemic. Generally speaking, a lot of people are not willing at the moment, due to border controls and the situations in terms of just living arrangements in China, to relocate. There are a lot of GMs, heads of China, that are relocating abroad to have a mental break. So as of this moment in time, I would say from a strategical standpoint, strategy should probably continue to be in the head office, although I do believe at some point it should also be in China, meaning that you have somebody in the HQ, somebody in China, they're building this bridge to talk about the strategy and the development of the company. And they are the link to this open communication. From marketing, sales, customer service, technical engineering, my belief is that this needs to be localized in China. Why? Because these functions have to occur in China. It's no longer the case where people can travel back and forth, back and forth. There are quarantine regulations. There is extreme cost associated with traveling to China now in terms of flight ticket costs, etc., quarantine costs. That it would make life a lot easier to have localized individuals in China delivering these services. And remember, these are functions that require local expertise and local knowledge. It's not even just a language issue. It's the local expertise and the knowledge level to do marketing and branding, sales, customer service, and technical engineering. In terms of supply chain and logistics and innovation, again, whether you do it abroad or China or both, it can happen. I see it in many scenarios where there's a mix and match of that, because I don't see them as you know, you could have a demand manager that is sitting in Europe who's taking care of the demand that is required, although they might not have direct influence with the logistics, direct contact with the logistics providers and things like that. You can still do this from abroad. It's not a main function that has to happen immediately in China. The same with innovation. Administration, the functions have to happen in China. Payroll has to happen in China. Accounting has to happen physically in China. You cannot do this from abroad. You have to follow the PRC gap regulations, the social insurance and housing fund regulations when you're doing all of the administrative functions. So this does have to be in China. Manfred, what is your opinion on this?
I think just picking one, you know, let me just pick the head of China. What I see in the last 12 months, but particularly after the Shanghai lockdown, is really that kind of running China remotely. If you already have a bit of a team there, there is a time limit to this. You cannot do it indefinitely. And that is something that when I talk to the GMs that move back, when I talk to the GMs that maybe kind of quit their contracts and said, look, you know, I'm not interested in living here anymore and any longer. We discussed that point a lot. And most of them have come to the same conclusion, saying, you know, look, I just need to be there. The old school ones, they just flat right out kind of do not accept the idea and notion of remote management. And the kind of those that are in their 40s or end 40s, they all agree that, you know, there's a limit to this one really. So depending on team size, depending again on speed, on growth, because also if you have somebody remote, you know, it will impact the speed that you can actually grow. I would more likely be inclined kind of to say, let's put that person in China. But again, that's something we need to look at a little bit in detail on what's your setup and how fast you want to go and kind of what you have available. But yeah, Westerners are kind of in short supply at the moment. That is definitely true, or very expensive.
I actually haven't touched on Westerners or foreigners for these roles. Sorry, I apologize for that, because we should probably talk about that difference in terms of Westerners and locals. For me, strategy is generally Western oriented, only because, again, I say it's communication bridge between HQ. But when you're talking about foreigners, there could be so many varieties of this. It could be a Westerner who's coming from the head office and is being seconded over. It could also be, I don't know, an American Chinese, or a Chinese that has lived abroad and is going to be based in China. It's somebody who's got this Western mindset, who has had that experience abroad and is then relocating to China.
I think what you at least need to make sure is that there is a certain understanding of your own culture in that person's vita, in that person's life. You cannot take a Chinese guy who's never been abroad and who's only ever worked for purely Chinese companies and then think you'll be successful in making that person the head of your team in China. It will not work, you know. I'll bet very large sums on the fact that it will not work. And I think that is important, that cultural topic. But as Christina said, you know, you can do it differently. If you start, I think, again, the key point will be trust. You need to establish that trust. That is the big advantage if you bring somebody from your headquarters to China, which is difficult at the moment, and which I think you need to look at in detail, and not just roughly. You really need to work out the details, including flights back home, including visas and all these kind of things, because at the moment is rather tricky. And if you pick kind of somebody who's over there and who's not from your own team, then you need to think a little bit more on how to build up that relationship and how to build up that trust. Because if you don't have that relationship, and if you don't have that trust, I think it will be very difficult for you to harness and to, you know, make use of the business opportunities out there.
Let's move on. In terms of these third parties, again, for me, all of them have to be in China, especially from the administration point of view, in terms of lawyers and corporation agents, etc. And then also, suppliers don't have to be in China, but it depends again on your supply chain and how that's looking, whether they should be in China or not. Logistics providers will be in China, TPs will be in China, distributors will be in China. Some might say, well, could they be in Hong Kong? They could, but will that really bring you the traction that you need if they are only based in Hong Kong and not in mainland China itself? So do evaluate all of that as well. Now, let's start with the scenarios for employing people in China. And there are a variety of different ways of employing people. Because again, the whole point of this China market entry workshop series is to ultimately say you are not forced to set up a subsidiary or an entity in China, okay? You can start off in many different ways. The simplest way, though, to hire people is if you do have a subsidiary, it's a direct employment relationship between your Chinese subsidiary and the employee that is based in mainland China, okay? So like it is in Europe, you have a German company, you're hiring somebody who lives in Germany and they are hired directly. The relationship is direct between one and the other, all right? Option 2 is a labor dispatch arrangement between a China company and flexible employees. Now, by flexible employees, this means they are project management based employees. It is not a long-term employment relationship. They are there for a specific period of time to fulfill project guidelines and act as project managers. You still need a Chinese subsidiary to sign this labor dispatch arrangement, but ultimately the labor relationship is with the dispatch company versus your Chinese company, okay? Now, labor dispatch arrangements are also occurring now to hire people that are located in other cities. But this is a second phase, second step arrangement that if you do grow and scale, you will need to know about, okay? But I won't go into depth today, but there are other forms of labor dispatch arrangements as well. Option 3 is part-time employees. This is a very gray area. Part-time employees usually don't have social insurance and housing fund obligations, if you will. They are just receiving a salary. They are registered under your company and they only work for a certain number of hours. Should be 20 hours or less. And that's a part-time employee. Independent contractors. This is actually where we get into a gray line because there are a lot of companies out there that sign, if you will, freelance agreements between HQ and these individuals that are residing in China. These freelance agreements are not even applicable by law in China because they won't be accepted as agreements if there is any form of breach. And you are indirectly liable for the social insurance and tax that has to be paid. So you need to be very wary of these types of relationships. Option 5 is the employer of record service, which I was highlighting yesterday as one of the options as well. This is where you're using an intermediary to hire an individual. This person is actually employed by that entity in China, but behind the scenes is working then full-time for you, and you have no entity in China whatsoever. Option 1 is the safest way to go if you have your own subsidiary in China. If you plan on not having a subsidiary in China, option 5 is the best option from a legality standpoint and for you to have leverage and power knowing that everything is going smoothly and correctly in the Chinese market.
And also option 5, is really kind of the faster version, depending on your organization, yes, depending on your ownership structure, depending on the committees that you might need to kind of go through in order to get the approval to set up something in China. It depends on the size of your operation, but some of our clients out there, they need to do quite a bit of things and consider quite a few people to then finally go set up, which might be too slow. For example, one case at the moment, we have a client that is growing tremendously kind of in the decentral energy storage area. and they need a unit in China down in Shenzhen to actually go and source the products that they need, because otherwise they simply can't produce. And for them, the kind of route that we devised is kind of to start with option 5 to do the employer of record service, and then parallelly prepare the foundation of the company and to get the motions accepted from all the necessary people, and then kind of, to do that route. So it's what Christina would call the mix and match kind of version.
Yeah, exactly. Just to finish off with 2 questions that I always get, which is very simply, can you hire in China without a legal presence? Very simply, no. So if you don't have a company established in China, you actually legally cannot hire any mainland Chinese staff. Okay. This is why we have the employer of record scheme. This is also why there are dispatch agencies available. Or this is also why this is a trigger for some companies to then actually set up their subsidiaries in China. This is fundamental. This is the foundation, guys, that you have to realize. Chinese regulations are not the same like Europe regulations or the Western world in terms of hiring people. Be aware of what you are allowed and not allowed to do. This leads on to the freelancer again. Can you hire a freelancer in China from abroad? Technically, this arrangement is not governed at all by Chinese labor law. There can be no legally binding labor contract in place because there is no entity in China. But what you need to be aware is that Chinese tax law will apply to the freelancer. And then the question is it up to the freelancer to pay the tax or the company that has no entity in China? And then also have to consider the social insurance and housing fund obligations that come parallel to that, where the freelancer would still have to be obliged to pay for that, at least their own benefits as well. Now, the biggest question is, does the freelancer actually do it? And if they don't do it, what is then the liability of the company abroad if they don't do it? Could it impact their future growth in the Chinese market? Okay, so please, please, please be aware of these 2 situations. It is fundamental for the foundation of the business. Manfred, do you want to add anything? No. What is the cost of having these people on board? So in terms of costs, calculations are different than in the Western world. And I haven't done a calculation simulation this time because it really comes down now to a place of city to be able to calculate appropriately the social insurance and housing fund contributions. But when you are negotiating with employees, please get the compensation validated by someone so you are fully aware of what your total payable is on a monthly basis. Your payable is not just the gross salary. It's gross salary plus social insurance and housing fund contributions. Okay. And don't forget, this will change if there are commissions and bonuses as well. So get simulations done so that you know, again, this is knowledge is power, guys. The more you know about the breakdown of somebody's salary, the more you have leverage to negotiate with them. If they suddenly ask for salary increases, if they suddenly say, oh, actually my social insurance and housing fund calculation is wrong. Otherwise you're stuck there looking like an idiot because you don't know what to answer, because you don't know what you can and cannot say, right? So please, 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 if you are negotiating, go to an accountant, go to whomever to get the full breakdown of the gross salary. And I've written here annual compensation because actually in China, you calculate income tax based on an annual compensation. Monthly income tax is deducted. It's going to be less in January, more in December, because you're looking at a accumulated tax amount month to month. And then you have to separately think about social insurance and housing fund contributions. Just to throw out numbers there, if the person is residing in Shanghai, employed by a Shanghai entity, and salary is around 30,000 renminbi gross per month, I'm putting it into month, you're looking at a payable of between 38 and 40,000 renminbi. because of the social insurance and housing fund contributions that come on top. It is exorbitant. Again, back to day one, China is not cheap. And Manfred highlighted this as well, that actually salaries nowadays in China are equivalent to European salaries.
At least.
At least, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. What you also need to look at is visa requirements and hukou status. I haven't added hukou status here. This is going to be a new term for a lot of people. Visa requirements will be applicable to foreigners that are relocating to China, meaning they are not mainland Chinese passport holders. And hukou status is understanding the residency. Hukou is the residency of the employees in China. Where is their residency? It's not always going to be in the same city where your company is registered or where your third-party provider that's going to offer employment is based. So this has to be taken into consideration also within the negotiation.
So adding kind of two words here at that point. The hukou is something that is a concept we don't have in Europe. The hukou is something that is important for Chinese because it influences things like, can my kid go to university in this city? Or how difficult will it be for my kid to go to school and to university in this city? So if you try and transplant somebody from southwestern China to Shanghai, that is not as easy as you might think, or put otherwise. Just because you have agreed on a certain yearly salary will not mean that you're done with the job.
Yeah.
You know, that is definitely something with Chinese when you're kind of doing the salary negotiations. Just because there's a sort of rough agreement, don't feel safe, you know.
And just a second point from Manfred regarding the schooling of the kids. It's also if they plan on purchasing a property, where are they planning on purchasing that property will also affect where the housing fund contribution should be made into. So this negotiation is not just from a corporate perspective. You also have to go a little bit into the personal life of these individuals, which is definitely not a bad thing because you get to know them better. But it does impact then the social insurance and housing fund contributions that will be associated. Additionally, calculate allowances, insurances, and then general company policies during working hours, right? What are guidelines? For example, salesperson is going out. Do they have a limit of spending for a lunch with a customer or for a dinner with a customer? Do you have these internal guidelines in place? I'm a big believer in processes and system guidelines and operational guidelines. If you don't have these in place from day one, it will become chaotic and you are basically giving extreme liberty and freedom to these individuals to spend what they like if there are no guidelines in place. Okay, so definitely consider the additional allowances, if any, and again, get advice. What allowances are being offered? How much is being offered? I actually just got a question this morning in terms of what is the average payment made for mileage. So if you have a salesperson or a BD manager that's traveling and driving throughout China to meet clients, what is the reimbursement on mileage? I actually don't know the answer to that. But these are things where Manfred can come into play and ask these, you ask somebody, you ask an expert for all of these questions, right? The same with travel insurance, medical insurance, and how does that relate then to the social insurances that are being offered? So that's the end of that presentation. And now it's just a discussion point between Manfred and I in terms of what are the challenges and solutions in building this network of people in China. Putting you on the spot, Manfred.
I think you know, it's I guess to a certain degree as simple as and as difficult. It's really getting started to a certain degree, you know. You need to start somewhere, because as much as I agree kind of with you and with your model, I think we both also know that you need to have some experience kind of to distinguish the better providers from the worst ones, and kind of, you know, to to have a bit of an idea on how does a quality Chinese partner look and feel like, and how it doesn't, because I think a lot of us who haven't been exposed to China, it's about, getting a feeling for how does it feel like, uncertainty and all these questions, they're hindering us so much to really get into it, that I feel maybe for those who haven't been exposed to it a lot, really it's about getting started and having these conversations and meeting, or at least e-meeting these people, and kind of getting an idea on how does Christina Colucci feel like, and how does kind of a competitor feel like, to then understand, oh wow, I'd be getting this and that and that kind of thing.
I think one side I would say about employment of people, 2021, I've never seen so many companies hire people without ever actually having met them face to face.
Yes, that's a big one.
So there are still a lot of companies that are not comfortable enough to hire people without meeting them physically face to face. But then you have to look at the opportunity in China. You have to look at the growth that you want to make in China. And at some point, you just have to deal with the fact that we cannot travel physically. And you have to do things over Zoom or Teams meeting or however you want to call it.
I think,
go ahead, Manfred.
I think that really kind of brings us back to expectations and to systems. What does that physical meeting? It kind of it instills certainty in us. It instills certainty and instills trust. If you hire somebody remotely, and as also we kind of as a distributed team of 14 people kind of do globally, if you don't have systems, if you don't have evaluation procedures, I think it actually will be difficult for you, because you might also need to get rid of some people that you have hired because it's simply not a fit. And I think this is where some of our kind of older clients are more challenged. I feel it, I see it, I notice it. It's just the wish kind of, to a certain degree to go back to how it used to be. But I'm with you, you need to find ways for it. Because again, we've also in the last couple of years, ever since the pandemic started, we've switched plant leaders without, being there. We've switched GMs without flying there. We've brought in new GMs without flying them in and kind of having what used to be normal, get to know the owner, get to know the CEO, spend a day at the company, that sort of thing. Because it was necessary, not because we wanted to, not because we enjoy it this way, but because it was necessary.
So I think it is a challenge. It is a challenge of building a team without physically seeing them or even being able to bring them to the HQ. The solution around it, there is none at the moment, right? There are border controls, flight tickets are exorbitant. Mainland Chinese people cannot leave China. So there are restrictions that are in place. And the question that I raise to a lot of people is, which is the whole point of this workshop series, is to go or not to go, right? If this is going to be now a barrier or an obstacle for you to proceed with China, well, then you're not going. It's as simple as that. You're not going to attain that opportunity or grow and scale in the market. I am so used to Zoom now. It's become my new norm, that doing interviews is as if, I guess my solution to the problem is that instead of having one face-to-face meeting, I have now several Zoom calls, not just one interview call. I do several to get an impression over a week's time, over 2 weeks' time to interview people. The other challenge that I will highlight, and because Manfred and I spoke about this last week, is people taking too long to make a decision, right? Manfred highlighted, you've got to start, right? So if your decision is, we're going to go to China and we're going to hire people to support our business on the ground, You've made that decision. Do not now let the interview processes halt you. If it takes you 1 month to analyze and choose somebody, you're going to lose those people. Okay? Simple as that. You're going to turn the candidates off and you will lose them as potential candidates for employment.
I think there's 2 points here that are important. The first point is really that, very often in China, not coming back is a kind of, a sort of silent no. And, it's about perception. It's not about reality. Perception is reality. So if the candidate perceives that this is a no, then of course they're looking somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And of course, we said we want to build an A team, right? People in the A league always have different offers. You need to woo them. You need to make them kind of, be interested in you. Don't treat them like you're the one who can choose. Treat them as if they could choose. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is simply, it's all good and all fine that your calendar is full. But if you kind of use headhunters like us, if you then have candidates that are interested, you need to move. And that goes kind of for every step. That goes for the step after we've talked with them and given you the video interviews. You looked at them, you need to move. But also for then the time that you say, we're going to the second interview, even maybe a third interview if needed, and then to an offer letter and then to the contract. It's a sort of every step kind of, should be following closely. And that is something where normally China is just much faster and we in Europe are just much, much slower. So, you take your standard recruitment process or the steps and you make the steps shorter. This is really what you'll need to be looking at. We have, clients again and again that because they don't listen, because they don't want to accept this fact, they just lose perfect candidates. And then they need to settle kind of with candidates that are
B grade or C grade. As simple as that. Yeah.
And it's not,
especially if you are in a niche where the pool is already lower in terms of skill set, right?
Exactly. And the funny thing is, it's not even just the only thing that you might have needed to do is to move one meeting in your calendar that you had penciled in there to make space for something that at that point of time is maybe more important than when you had penciled in that meeting 3 weeks ago. It's the only thing you need to do in order to take action, right? It's not rocket science, but you need to move. And that is something that most of the Western companies find difficult. And let me kind of come back to the previous challenge of going or not to go, that kind of Christina brought in. You will not be as fast as you think you are. So don't wait about that sort of perfect condition where all things align. I see so many companies out there, they don't even have thought about how do we give that candidate email access? How will we share information? And then their IT departments raise hell because there's now a Chinese colleague in China who's having access to their systems, So why am I saying this? I'm saying start with a guy if you have one, get in there. Even for the good ones, if there's a real market situation and opportunity there, the investment is not as large. You might have sunk more money in Italy without any of, the advantages. So because you start with the first guy, you go for 1, 2, 3 years, you see how it develops. You have what Christina said.
You build your knowledge base. You build your knowledge base on how it works.
You build the thing about the market. And it's like with the growth that happened with Zoom kind of now that the pandemic hit. You don't have that growth if you're not already there. You don't have that growth if you're not already prepared. In a sense, China is similar. That there will always be these waves. But you need to get in early, If you're not positioned, there will be no growth for you.
I probably will also add, because I think it's a nice lead off what you've just said, Manfred, is another challenge is the onboarding process. And this is onboarding for employees, for third parties, for whomever you're collaborating with, whoever is in your ecosystem. First of all, there needs to be an onboarding process. Okay, please do not under-evaluate this onboarding process, because like Manfred said, you have to think about IT. You have to think about how you're going to communicate and what modes of communication you're going to use. You have to think about expectations, and you have to deliver these expectations during this onboarding process. And it's a two-way street. The employer has to say what expectations he wants. One of the questions that I always ask candidates when I'm hiring them is, what do you need from me in the first 3 months of being onboarded? What would you need from me? What type of training would you need? What type of infrastructure would you need? Because I like to see how they're thinking. What do they need when they start with a new company and they've got certain guidelines, right? Gives me great insight into their thinking processes. And I highly recommend that as a question for anybody in an interview process. But do not under-evaluate the onboarding process. And onboarding is not just one Zoom call, guys. Onboarding is something looking at the first 6 months of being within the organization and having continuous communication. Do they have everything they need to fulfill your expectations? And then also, are you meeting their expectations? Don't be shy to ask these types of questions, okay? Because you need to have open dialogue and communication with the first people that are in your ecosystem. And this is why for me, having the monthly call with clients, it's a question I raise. Are you happy with us? Is there something we should fix? Do you like the reporting format we're sending out? Are you okay with the communication? Are you clicking well with the team? I need to know this because I need to make sure that my customers are happy with us. It's the same with your employees. It's the same with any third parties that you're collaborating with. Are you meeting each other's expectations? Is there this value ladder?
I think what you kind of maybe want to see with the onboarding, you know, if I try with an analogy in dancing, if you try and do some really tricky moves on the dance floor in tango, you know, you need to know your partner. You can't just kind of pick somebody that you don't know and then assume that it will work. And that is kind of where the onboarding has become so important now that everything's remote. You know, if you have the fly-ins, if you fly to China, you get to know the people better. Now you don't have that. So you really need to think about how did we do that in the pre-pandemic days? And what of that can we kind of, you know, collaborate and bring into the onboarding process now, that we get to know each other as good as possible, because that's what you will need. You know, you'll need that mutual understanding, also to know what can I let this person do. Some people can build a cathedral. Other people can only take one stone and bring it to exactly the place that you told them to bring it to. You, as the person driving that team in China, you need to understand that, because it doesn't make sense if the guy who's only carrying the stones, if you tell him, build me a cathedral, he will never be able to do that. And that is something is a responsibility of those who have leadership roles, you know, to understand that and then to act and communicate accordingly.
I think we're going to leave it there because we've also run out of time, but I mean, Manfred and I can go on for hours on this. If you guys have any questions, please add them into the chat box and ask away. Otherwise, just to remember, we have one last quick China strategy session open and available that is complimentary. This is a 90-minute workshop strategy session where we go through where you are today and where you would like to be in 3 years, and help to develop a type of execution plan on what needs to be done in those 3 years. So if you're interested, please email Manfred or myself. We've got one more opening available. And last but not least, if you want to speak with us directly, come join us tomorrow. This is a live Q&A. We're going to do a recap of the last 3 days. and hopefully highlight 3 action points and use some of you as case studies on what your action points will be following this workshop series. We're just looking at 3, hopefully it'll be 1 from each day, 1 from the data day, 1 from business models and budgeting, and 1 from today, which is building the ecosystem. If I can give 1 action plan for today, it's reviewing who is in your China ecosystem. Do you think these people are of value to you today? If not, what action will you take to change that? And who are you still missing from your ecosystem? Right? Evaluate what context do you still need to be able to grow and scale in the market. And otherwise, I will be sending out the recording to everybody. And I hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you so much, guys. See you tomorrow in the last session and the closing session. And I would also underline kind of the last point from Christina. Try and figure out, what are you still missing? And then take action between today and tomorrow to, find one of those. Now you're off, Christina. All right. So thank you, everybody, once again for joining in today. And we'll be seeing you tomorrow at 10 a.m. and then continue with the final closing round.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.